Hey everyone, back with a new video. It's been such a long time since the last one. I really wanted to talk about a module I've been using a lot in the past year since I got it basically, which is the Intellijel Atlantis, a semi-modular inspired by the mighty SH-101. As you can see, I've built myself a sort of semi-modular Tower of Doom here, powered by the Dub for Dark Time. The DFAM, of course, has its own sequencer, and I can use Dark Time to sequence either the SM1 or the Atlantis, or both at the same time. If I just want 8-step sequence, which is often the case with me, I'll just focus on the Atlantis today. I've been thinking of buying this module for about 8 years, I think. I've watched Myla's Melody's demo of the Metropolis. It blew my mind that you can make music with a step sequencer. He was using the Atlantis a lot in that video, and ever since then it's been in the back of my mind, and I never bought it. I never really even tried it in the store. Maybe a year ago, a bit more than that now. I just bought it. I said, fuck it, now it's time to buy it. I have the experience. I wanted something different. I wanted a monosynth for bass lines, basically. And I thought, what's best than a SH-101 for bass lines? I feel like there's been SH-101 in every record I like forever, so I should be able to do something decent or halfway decent with one. There wasn't very many videos of the Atlantis used in that context. I know the SH-101 is a classic. I know Atlantis to some extent is a classic, but you know, most of the videos are focused on showcasing how closely it can clone the SH-101 playing Caney Industries or something, which is fantastic, but not the use I had in mind. So yeah, I bought it. It's still quite a hefty purchase at like 700 euros or something, but I think it's totally worth it. And after using it in the studio for some time, I felt like it was the perfect module to use live as well. And it's been in my live case ever since I put it in it, basically. It took the place of the complex oscillator from Verbos, and it's just so much quicker to get to sounds I want, without giving up too much flexibility, actually, at least in a live context where you're not looking for the most crazy sounds. In the studio, I still have the complex oscillator, of course. In a live context, the Atlantis is just unbeatable. You can't make this thing sound bad. The sliders are pretty much perfect and super useful to get to sounds quickly, to move the sounds quickly. It's super fun, basically. So the sliders are short, but I don't think that's such a big drawback. It's still a pretty big module at 40 HP, although by Eurorack standards, yeah, it's big, but it's if you compare it to a proper SH-101, it's absolutely tiny. But to me, the fact that it was modular was really a big plus. Without further ado, let's dive into how I use this thing. I'm just going to focus on my typical use case, which is like plucky, simple sequence bass lines, stuff like this. Nothing too complicated. Hopefully it gives an idea of what you can do. And if you like Robert Hood, then you should like the Atlantis. I think we can start to dive on the Atlantis itself. So I'll be sequencing it with the Dub for Dark Time. Honestly, my sequencer of choice usually is the Voltage Multistage by Verbos, because that's the only one I have in modular form, at least. I recently bought this one. Originally, I wanted to use this to sequence the syncussion. I've been using Stepic VST to sequence syncussion. Yeah, it's actually perfect, so no need to change really. I've tried this with the OB6 as well, and it's absolutely killer. So I'll be using the Dark Time, which I think is an amazing, fun, old school sequencer. I have my pitch patched into the beautiful Manhattan Analog CVP, which is basically exactly the same thing as the CVP from Verbos, except it's 4 HP instead of 18 and much cheaper. It's not as full featured, of course. It's just one channel. Basically, you plug your pitch and you have a copy, so a mult, and 2 outs, which will be impacted by these 3 controls: offset, plus and minus, a glide, and a level. I don't really need the level with the Dub for Dark Time because you already have the control, the range. You can have 1 volt, 2 volt, 5 volts. But with the Voltage Multistage, it's invaluable to have this control. Here, the glide is just super nice to have, and the offset is also nice to have. I'll be using this in a combi mode, which is row 1 CV, row 2 gate time. The output is going into the multi-delay processor, which doesn't do anything right now. Maybe we'll add some delay later. Basically, I use it to make sequences like this. So this is triangle wave. We have the drive in the middle. I usually keep it here or even further. I think it sounds pretty nice. Although it is to be noted that the module can clip a bit. There's the LED here, but it's not always perfectly nice. So if you like the drive and the character it impacts to the sound, you just have to back off from the filters. It's fine when you have just one waveform, but when you start to add them up, the drive can just be a bit too much. Here you can really hear its effects. But let's keep it in the middle for most of the demo. Beautiful triangle wave. One thing that was immediately obvious for me when I got this module is how, I mean, it's gonna sound like synthesis 101 to everyone and people are gonna say, are you fucking dumb or what? But the power of adding different waves to me was like, oh man, this sounds fat. Because with the complex oscillator, the fact that there's a master output that goes through the timbre controls and the harmonics controls, I just never really used the individual outputs to stack them up in a mixer. I don't know, it's just not the way I feel the verbose system is wired. Whereas here, that's definitely how it's intended to be used, because you have those sliders and I mean, you kind of have to put them up in one configuration or another, and it sounds so good and so fat. So that was one of the first obvious discoveries I did, but I really like it. So that's the triangle wave, that's the square wave. You have the pulse width modulation, which you can control with the envelope, external modulation, or the modulator, which is here it's on VCO mode, but now it's an LFO. And you can clearly hear the effect of the pulse width modulation, which here is a bit excessive. And of course you can use the envelope as well. So very nice impact on the sound, although I don't use it that much. I mean, to shape my sounds. I don't feel like pulse width modulation is something I'm very used to. Once again, because using the complex oscillator, there's no pulse width modulation. So I've never really taken that into account in my sound design, I guess. You can hear here the filter is really closed. This is with the filter completely open, which I don't really use the filter open that much. Of course, you can adapt your envelope to your tastes. My way of using the Atlantis is really with the filter totally or almost closed down. And these three controls are where the magic happens for me. That's the only thing I would say is a bit of a miss on the Atlantis. It's the resonance. Basically past that, which is like half a nano-millimeter on the slider, it's unusable unless you're really, really, really into acid, which I'm really, 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 really not. There's one way to use the resonance, which is like this, as an oscillator. And it makes a very beautiful sine wave, but I've never really used the sine wave here, which is, it's nice that it's patched in. It's a feature you don't get on the SH101. Yeah, and of course you can get, if you apply the envelope, you get zaps and stuff like this, but if you just apply volt per octave, and if you go all the way up, you get a volt per octave signal, but if you go halfway, your volt per octave will be a bit out of whack, and this can lead to interesting sounds and melodies, completely dissonant, which is nice. You can of course apply the LFO, the VCO, FM, the filter, but we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. I was talking about the filter in its very most basic form, which is plucky sounds, short envelopes, which I think are really, really nice. The envelopes on that thing are really important, I think, because they're just very snappy and good. Can be a bit clicky with the attack at very, very minimum setting. You have 4 pulls, 2 pulls. I prefer the 4 pulls setting because it's much sharper, and for the kind of sounds I like, I think it works better. Let's add some subs. You have 1 octave, 2 octaves, and 2 octaves with pulse width modulation. Honestly, I don't really use the sub octave that much. I feel like this thing goes super low already with just basic waves. But I had the same thought about the OB6. The sub oscillator is just too much sometimes. So yeah, I tend to use these 2 only, but you can definitely get earth shaking subs out of that thing, especially on a big sound system. But even without the sub os, honestly. The RP boost is nice. It doesn't make you lose bass when you wiggle the filter and the resonance. Always a nice feature to have, and then you can inverse the envelope to the filter, which makes this sort of a reverse sounds. It's nice to have, but honestly I don't really use that much, but it's nice to have. Then you have the patch bay, of course. So we only have 1 volt per octave and gate plugged in, but you have all these outputs from the modulator, and I very, very often use the modulator as a second oscillator. And to do this, I just usually take the triangle wave and put it into the external in, which will bypass the sine wave, and then you can get sort of 4 chords. Of course, you have to put this into VCO mode. So this is just the wave from the modulator, and here the link is not up, so it doesn't follow the pitch, but you can get it to follow the pitch. This is super nice to have as well, especially if you're using the modulator as a FM oscillator. So we'll get into that later. So once you're there, you're applying your pitch to your modulator, which is a full-fledged oscillator, and you can sort of tune these 2. I mean, just happens to be okay here, I feel. And you can get these sort of chords, I mean, 4 chords, which I'm really into. If you have some effects, it's already nice, I think. I can turn this into 5 volts. To get a feeling a bit closer to the voltage multi-stage. So if you unlink the 2 oscillators, this one will just drone continuously, which can be nice, but in that 4-chord configuration, maybe not the best. And then the modulation from the filter comes from usually the mod os. That's how it's routed. So here it's just gonna FM the filter with the audio rate we are hearing here. So not always the best result. I usually like to patch an external signal into the mod in. So I'm going to use Pamela's new workout, and let's say I have an envelope or something. And this will create sudden bursts of sound in a rhythmic or not manner, which like this, like we just heard. In a live set, I feel like this is super nice to breathe life into a simple loop like this. This is super dry. It's not very crazily interesting right now, but when you have that, like say an Euclidean envelope coming in here and there, just And if it's going through effects, it will have a drastic impact. And I think, I mean, it's just simple modulation, but it's nice. So it's nice, like these three controls, you have a lot of expressivity with this, just because they all add to one another in subtle or not subtle ways. One other thing I like to do is just closing completely this, and it's only when the modulation comes in that you have the sound. So depending on the modulation you've chosen, you'll have a sound that's barely audible, and then it is just gonna bloom in a way. So let's illustrate this with some additional sounds from the 909, maybe a bass line, and maybe some effects. From the Ensoniq DP4 for additional 90s flavor. Of course, you have the band pass, which sounds super nice as well, and high pass. So the glide, I think, is nice also. Depends on the sequence. I've balanced the levels a bit. So yeah, this is maybe a typical loop I would do. Super simple stuff. You can always, like, if you're not, say you don't want the chord, you just want a simple typical SH101 Robert Hood minor stuff, but you want to go into more complex oscillator territory, then you can FM so easily. And I think that's, again, so nice to be able to go from this sound, which, you know, classic techno, it's always going to sound good, something like this. It can be more or less drastic depending on the position of the switch, exponential or linear. Linear is going to keep more of the original pitch. Exponential, of course, is going to be more drastic. And then the nice thing too is that you're using the triangle wave here if you want to hear it. So here we're hearing the triangle wave, but also using that wave, that oscillator, to FM the main oscillator. But you don't have to use the same wave. You can switch it here. It's going to switch the one that FMs the oscillator, but not the one you're hearing, because the one you're hearing you have to patch. You can try mid-sequence. Different ways. Of course, sample and hold is going to be a bit excessive. Noise as well. And you can add some swing with the talk time. Often sounds pretty nice with that kind of sequence. Although the resonance is quickly too much, a tiny amount is really nice. It's just, you can't go very far. That's the only thing. And of course, you can extend the range of the envelope if you're into really long sounds. The cycle only works if you don't have anything patched into the gate. So you can't do cycle with gate. Let's go back to classic. So that's 2 oscillators with the FM, and now just one with the FM, exponential FM. And like I was saying, if you don't like the link, you're gonna get even more metallic timbres like this. It basically turns this module into complex oscillator without the timbre section. I like these a lot. And you can hear the sort of, it's not velocity, but the swell of the sounds with the gate time. And another thing I think is very clever on that module is the level input, because basically it's a VCA that's a master VCA to the module. So if you plug something into it, you're silencing the sound if you have a dummy cable. And why I think this is useful live is because sometimes you don't want an 8 sequence repeating endlessly, because it's going to drive you crazy and it's going to drive probably a few audience members crazy. So you can easily do that in the box if you're in the studio, or you can easily do that with a sequence selector or sequential switch to basically have your gate sequence pass through just some of the time. But I was constrained for space in my case, and I wanted a solution to have the sequence happen like once every bar or something. It just dawned on me that I can use the Pamela's New Workout and a gate with the appropriate division to just let the sound go through and just silence the Atlantis when I don't need it. So you can prepare a few different gates with few different phase offsets to do this. And then, especially if you have another sequence coming on, let's say on the octave track, or you already have a lead, then you can do call and response. And it's especially nice when you add effects and delays after this, because it lets the time for the effect to bloom and develop in beautiful ways. Which, if your sequence is endlessly repeating 8, 8, 8, 8, then you don't really get that. So this is very, very simple stuff, but you know, just this I think is already makes for a pretty strong module. I think the glide really brings something to these kind of sounds. And it's nice to have an attenuator nearby. Basically true for anything regarding modular. really had some heft to the sound. Okay, so I wanted to show a bit more of a typical use I'd have of the dark time with the Atlantis, and also how this combi mode works. So let's have like a kick and a bass for context, something super basic like this. We'll add some Atlantis. The 4-chord stuff. I really like also using Ableton amp. So if you're using a DAW, it's just a amp simulation. It adds a lot of noise, but also it's nice. Adds a lot of heft to the sound. And so here, my B row, everything is at minimum here. You can get some beautiful expressivity. Again, a bit different than what you get on the voltage multistage. The gate time, it's just something you get on the dark time, but if you have a sequencer with gate times, like where you can change the gate times or modulate the gate times, which you can do on the voltage multistage and you can program here, it's a very good pairing with the Atlantis, I think. Tiny slapback delay. Definitely something more bleepy like this. Let's hear it without the amp. Amp basically adds a lot of treble, mid, but also bass. You kind of have to have a compressor after to control it sometimes, but it's nice. You can have a very, very little amount. Of pitch modulation. Super repetitive. I'm sorry, I can get lost into these kind of sounds for hours. We haven't really mentioned the noise. I love how, with this dynamics, it reacts to the effects, to the DP4 and the tiny amount of reverb here. And the modulation, it's already living and breathing. It's such a simple, dumb sequence, but I don't know, I'm hopelessly in love with techno, I guess. I love simple loops like this. proper sound system, it gets you going. So there's a bass line. The thing with the sub-ox is that it's always a square wave, sometimes a bit too harmonically rich for me. So sometimes you can get amazing bassline synth hybrid and basically no need for bassline. This one is pretty subtle anyway. Let's start from a sequence at 0. Off. So let's try to make something from scratch. Another cool thing you can do with this is change the direction. Basically let it run until you catch something that you like and loop it in the DAW, DAW, or classic way, or down. So I hope this simple video was helpful to get an idea of how you can use the Atlantis to make simple techno sequence, simple loops. I really thought I had more to say about this, but actually, you know, it's just fun and simple to use, and it's the power of the monosynth. This SH101 is the perfect entry level synth. It's just the controls are perfectly laid out. It's simple, and but still super powerful. And Intellijel took this core principle and pasted it onto a Eurorack module, and they gave it the added functionality of a Eurorack module so that it works within a modular context. There's also a second oscillator and blah, blah, blah. Lots of stuff you can do that pushes the boundaries of what you can do with a proper SH101. They're not exactly the same, of course, and honestly, I've never even touched a SH101, so I can't compare in any way. If you want to go further, I have an EP that came out not too long ago where it's glaringly obvious I've used this thing on it. I'll link it in the description if you want to take a listen. And I'll see you in the next one, hopefully in less than a year or 6 months or whatever was the time since the previous video. See you.